The stars had never seen anything like the Zephyrian Empire before. Their massive ships moved through space like dark clouds, bringing death and conquest to every world they found. For 300 years, they had crushed 17 different star systems. Not one planet had ever survived their attack. Not one species had ever made them retreat. The Zephyrians were not like humans at all. They stood 9 feet tall with bodies made of living crystal that could stop bullets and energy beams. Their arms ended in sharp claws that could cut through metal like paper. They had no eyes as humans understood them, but they could see in ways that made human vision look weak and useless. When they spoke, their voices sounded like breaking glass mixed with thunder, but the Zephyrians were not the only warriors in their empire. They had conquered so many worlds that they now commanded armies from dozens of different alien species. Each one brought their own special skills to the fight. The Thoraxians were perhaps the most feared of all. These creatures looked like giant insects crossed with medieval knights. They had 4 arms, each one ending in claws that dripped with poison. Their thick armor could stop almost any weapon humans had ever built. They moved faster than anything their size should be able to move. When a Thoraxian warrior entered battle, the sound of their war cry could be heard from miles away. They had personally destroyed the armies of 6 different worlds. Then there were the Mindari, beings that could reach into your thoughts and crush your mind from the inside. They looked almost human except for their completely black eyes and the way they never seemed to blink. A Mindari warrior could make an entire army forget how to fight just by looking at them. They could plant thoughts in your head that were not your own. They could make you see things that were not there. Worst of all, they could make you turn your weapons on your own friends and family. The Vexani were perhaps the strangest of all. The alien warriors, they had no fixed shape at all. One moment they might look like a human soldier, the next they could become a giant monster with teeth and claws. They could copy any form they saw and make it better, stronger, more deadly. No one had ever seen a Vexani in their true form because they were always copying something else. They were perfect spies and perfect killers. Admiral Kethver commanded this massive army from his flagship called the Eternal Dominion. The ship was so large that it had its own weather systems inside. Cities could fit in its cargo holds. The Admiral himself was ancient even by Zephyrian standards. His crystal body had grown dark with age and experience. He had led the conquest of more worlds than any other commander in the Empire's history on this day. Admiral Kethver stood in his command center looking at a small blue and green planet that appeared on his screens. The planet was called Earth by the creatures that lived there. Initial scans showed that it was home to a species called humans. The Admiral had seen thousands of different species in his long career. Most of them surrendered without a fight once they saw the size of his fleet. Others fought bravely but uselessly against weapons they could not understand or match. The humans seemed to be no different from any other primitive species. They had basic nuclear weapons and simple energy shields. Their largest ships were tiny, compared to even the smallest Zephyrian vessel. Their technology was hundreds of years behind what the Empire possessed. By every measure that mattered in warfare, the humans should be defeated within hours of the first attack. Commander Dextra of the Thoraxians was already sharpening his claws in anticipation. He had requested permission to lead the first assault wave. His warriors had been traveling in space for months without a proper battle. They were hungry for combat and the chance to prove their worth once again. Dextra himself had killed over 300 enemy warriors in single combat. He wore their bones as decorations on his armor. Scion Veltar spoke for the Mindari forces. Unlike the others, he did not speak with his mouth but projected his thoughts directly into the minds of those around him. His mental voice was cold and sharp like ice. He had already reached out with his mind toward the human planet and found their thoughts to be simple and unguarded. It would be easy work to break their will to fight before the battle even began, the Vexani commander had taken the form of a beautiful human female for this meeting, though everyone knew this was just another disguise. She said nothing but her smile promised terrible things for the humans below. The Vexani had studied human forms from intercepted broadcasts and were eager to test their new shapes in actual combat. Far below on Earth, Captain Jake Morrison sat in the command center of an orbital defense platform called New Horizon. Jake was 53 years old, with gray hair and lines around his eyes that spoke of many years spent in dangerous places. He had fought in 3 different wars on Earth, and had seen things that would give most people nightmares. But nothing in his experience had prepared him for what was approaching his planet. Lieutenant Amy Collins worked at the communications station nearby. She was 28 years old and had joined the Space Force because she wanted to see the stars. She had never expected to be the first human to receive a message from an alien empire demanding Earth's surrender. Her hands shook slightly as she adjusted the translation software and tried to make sense of the signals coming from the massive fleet that had just appeared at the edge of their solar system. Commander Pete Rogers handled tactical operations from his station across the room. Pete was Jake's oldest friend and had served with him in 2 previous conflicts. He was the kind of man who could look at impossible odds and find a way to even them out. But as he ran calculation after calculation on his computer, every scenario ended the same way. The human race had perhaps 6 hours before complete defeat. The alien message was simple and direct. Surrender now or be destroyed. There would be no negotiation and no mercy for those who resisted. The Empire had spoken, and the Empire was never wrong. Jake Morrison looked at the massive alien fleet on his screens and did something that surprised everyone in the command center. He smiled. The War Council aboard the Eternal Dominion was unlike anything humans could imagine. The massive chamber stretched for hundreds of feet, in every direction, with walls made of the same living crystal that formed Zephyrian bodies. Light moved through these walls in patterns that hurt human eyes to look at. The air itself hummed with energy that could power entire cities back on Earth. Admiral Kethver stood at the center of it all, his ancient crystal form catching and reflecting the strange light. Around him gathered the champions of a dozen conquered worlds. Each one represented a different way of bringing death and destruction to their enemies. Each one had never known defeat. Commander Thextra clicked his 4 sets of claws against the crystal floor in an eager rhythm. The Thoraxian war leader was larger than most of his kind, standing nearly 14 feet tall when he raised himself to his full height. His armor was black and scarred from countless battles. The bones of his enemies hung from his belt like a grisly trophy collection. His compound eyes gleamed with anticipation as he spoke. "The humans have primitive weapons and weak defenses," he said in his clicking language. "My warriors could break through their orbital stations in less than 1 hour. Let us lead the assault and finish this quickly. My soldiers grow restless when they go too long without proper combat." Scion Veltar floated near the edge of the circle, his form barely solid in the physical world. The Mendari preferred to exist mostly in the realm of thought and only took physical shape when absolutely necessary. His mental voice cut through the minds of everyone present like a cold knife. "The attack was unnecessary," he projected. "I have already touched the edges of their planetary consciousness. Their minds are simple and unguarded. A basic mental domination of their leadership would end this conflict without firing a single shot." The Vexani representative had chosen to appear as a perfect copy of Admiral Kethver himself, though smaller and somehow more predatory-looking. When she spoke, her voice was exactly like the Admiral's, but with an undertone that suggested hidden dangers. "Both approaches waste time and resources," she said smoothly. "Allow me to infiltrate their command structure. Within hours I could replace their key leaders and have them surrender their own planet willingly, Admiral." Kethver listened to each suggestion with the patience of someone who had heard similar discussions countless times before. Every species they had conquered had presented similar challenges. Every world had fallen to one of these proven methods. The humans would be no different, but as the Admiral prepared to give his orders, something unexpected happened. Lieutenant Amy Collins' voice came through the communication systems of every ship in the Zephyrian fleet simultaneously. "This is an open transmission from the Earth Defense Force," she announced. "Captain Jake Morrison requests to speak directly." With the commander of your fleet. The war council fell silent. In 500 years of conquest, no enemy had ever made direct contact during a war council meeting. The very idea was so unusual that none of them knew how to respond at first. Admiral Kethver gestured for silence as the transmission continued. Let them speak, he decided. It would be interesting to hear what these primitives had to say before their destruction. Jake Morrison's voice came through clear and steady. This is Captain Jake Morrison of the Earth Defense Force. I want to speak directly to your warriors. Your champions, your strongest fighters. Commander Thexra's claws scraped against the floor in what might have been laughter. Cyan Veltar's mental projection radiated amusement. The Vexani representative smiled with the Admiral's own face in a way that was deeply unsettling. You wish to negotiate terms of surrender? Admiral Kethver replied through his own transmission system. His voice carried the weight of centuries and the certainty of someone who had never been wrong about the outcome of a battle. No, Jake said simply. I want to challenge your best warrior to single combat. If your champion wins, Earth surrenders unconditionally. If our champion wins, you withdraw from our system permanently and never return. The silence that followed was complete and absolute. Even the background hum of the ship's system seemed to pause. In the entire recorded history of the Zephyrion Empire, no conquered species had ever made such a proposal. Commander Thexra was the first to break the silence. His clicking laughter filled the chamber like the sound of breaking bones. A duel, he managed to say between clicks. This primitive species wishes to send one warrior against the champions of the Empire. I volunteer to end this farce personally. Veltar's mental voice carried overtones of cruel amusement. Single combat is beneath our dignity, but if it amuses the Admiral, I could simply dissolve their champion's mind before they could take 3 steps into the arena. The Vexani representative studied her claws thoughtfully. Or I could take their champion's form and defeat them with their own shape, she suggested. The psychological impact alone would break their species. Will to resist. Admiral Kethver considered the proposal carefully. It was unusual, certainly, but not without precedent in galactic law. Single combat challenges were an ancient tradition among warrior cultures. More importantly, it would make for an interesting story to share with the High Command back on the home worlds. The outcome was never in doubt, of course, but the method would be memorable. There was also a practical consideration. The Admiral had been looking for a way to test his champions against fresh opponents. The last few conquests had been too easy, with enemies that surrendered before his warriors could properly demonstrate their skills. A formal duel would give each of his champions a chance to showcase their abilities for the younger warriors. In the fleet. We accept your terms, Human Morrison, Admiral Kethver announced after several minutes of consideration. Choose your warrior. We shall select from among our finest champions. The combat will take place in neutral space between your world and ours. Back on the New Horizon. Commander Pete Rogers grabbed Jake's arm with a grip that threatened to leave bruises. Sir, with all due respect, have you completely lost your mind? He whispered urgently. Our best soldiers are good, but these aliens have been conquering worlds for centuries. Their champions have probably killed thousands of warriors in single combat. Jake nodded calmly to Lieutenant Amy Collins. Patch me through to Earth Command. Tell them to wake up Danny Wilson. Danny Wilson, sir, she questioned, her fingers hesitating over the communication controls. The maintenance chief from Station 7, that's the one, Jake confirmed. Pete Rogers nearly dropped his coffee cup. Jake, please tell me you're not seriously considering sending a maintenance worker to fight an alien champion in single combat. These creatures could probably tear apart our best Special Forces soldiers without breaking a sweat. Danny's not just any maintenance worker, Pete, Jake replied with the kind of calm confidence that had kept him alive through 3 wars. Before he transferred to engineering, he was the heavyweight champion of the Intersolar Boxing League for 3 consecutive years. More importantly, he's got something these aliens have never encountered before, which is what exactly, Pete asked. Though he was beginning to suspect he didn't want to know the answer, Jake's smile was the same. One he had worn just before pulling off impossible victories in 2 previous conflicts. A complete and utter lack of respect for the impossible. He said simply, 3 hours later. Chief Petty Officer Danny Wilson stood in the main docking bay of New Horizon, slowly stretching his massive frame and working the kinks out of muscles that had been sleeping just hours before. Chief Petty Officer Danny Wilson stood 6 feet 8 inches tall and weighed 260 pounds of solid muscle. His hands were the size of dinner plates and scarred from years of working with dangerous machinery. His face looked like it had been carved from granite by someone who wasn't particularly worried about making it pretty. When Danny smiled, which he was doing now, it was the kind of smile that made smart people take a step backward. So, Captain, Danny said while rolling his massive shoulders to work out the stiffness from his interrupted sleep, I hear somebody wants to fight. Jake Morrison looked at his old friend and felt a familiar surge of confidence. Danny Wilson was the kind of man who had once jury-rigged a failing life support system using nothing but spare parts and pure stubbornness, keeping 300 people alive for 2 weeks while floating dead in space. He was the type of person who looked at impossible engineering problems and simply refused to accept that they couldn't be solved. That's right, Danny, Jake replied. Aliens showed up demanding our surrender. I told them we'd settle it with single combat. They picked their best warrior. Now I need to pick ours. Danny cracked his knuckles with sounds like small explosions. What kind of alien are we talking about here? He asked casually, as if discussing the weather. Lieutenant Amy Collins pulled up the intelligence files on her portable screen. According to our scans, they've selected something called a Thoraxian champion. 12 feet tall, 4 arms, natural armor plating, claws that can cut through starship hull metal, and poison glands that can kill most known life forms. Danny nodded thoughtfully. Sounds tough, he agreed. What else? Commander Pete Rogers read from this tactical analysis. The creature has killed over 300 enemy warriors in single combat across 12 different worlds. It moves faster than anything its size should be able to move. Its armor can deflect plasma fire. And it can apparently see in about 17 different light spectrums. Danny stretched his arms above his head until his joints popped. Anything else I should know? He asked. Jake pulled up the final piece of intelligence. The thing is basically a living weapon that's been designed by evolution and enhanced by alien technology to be the perfect killing machine. It's never lost a fight. Ever. Danny Wilson considered this information for exactly 3 seconds. Then he shrugged his massive shoulders and picked up his toolkit. Sounds like a Tuesday, he said simply. Commander Rogers stared at him. Danny, did you hear what we just told you? This thing has killed hundreds of warriors. It's 12 feet tall with 4 arms and claws. That can cut through metal. Danny opened his toolkit and began examining the contents with the careful attention of a master craftsman. I heard you, he replied without looking up. Question is, has this big scary alien ever fought someone who wasn't trying to kill it back? The question hung in the air for a moment before Jake Morrison began to smile. That's my boy, he said quietly. What exactly are you planning? Danny, Amy asked. Though she was beginning to suspect that she might not want to know the answer, Danny looked up from his toolkit with the expression of someone who had just figured out an interesting puzzle. Well, the way I see it, this alien is expecting a fight. It's probably spent its whole life learning how to kill things that are trying to kill it, but what if I don't try to kill it back? What if I just try to solve it instead? Solve it, Pete. Repeated slowly, Danny nodded and pulled a small device from his toolkit. This here is a standard issue plasma welder, he explained. With some modifications, it can also generate energy barriers. Add some spare parts from the mining equipment, and you've got yourself a basic construction system. Jake was starting to understand. You're not planning to fight the alien at all, are you? Danny's grin was the same one he wore when he had successfully repaired something that 3 other engineers had declared impossible to fix. I'm planning to build something, he said. These aliens think in terms of combat because that's all they've ever known. But I think in terms of engineering problems. And every engineering problem has a solution. The transport ship that carried Danny to the designated combat zone was small and fast. The asteroid field between Earth and Mars had been cleared of debris and equipped with atmospheric generators to accommodate both human and alien physiology. The area was roughly the size of a football stadium, surrounded by energy barriers that would contain the combat, while allowing both fleets to observe. Thousands of ships from both sides formed a massive ring around the combat zone. The Zephyrian fleet alone contained more firepower than Earth had ever seen in one place. Each alien vessel was a work of art and engineering that made human technology look like stone tools by comparison. The crews of these ships settled in to watch what they expected to be the shortest decisive battle in galactic history. Admiral Kethfer had chosen Champion Zarthik personally. The Thraxian war beast was considered the finest single combatant in the entire empire. His natural armor had been enhanced with alien technology until it could deflect weapons that could destroy buildings. His forearms ended in claws that had been sharpened to molecular edges. His speed and reflexes had been augmented until he could move faster than human. Eyes could follow. Zarthik had personally killed over 300 enemy warriors across more than 50 different battles. He had faced opponents armed with energy, weapons, plasma cannons, force fields, and exotic technologies that humans couldn't even imagine. Some had been larger than him, others faster, others armed with better weapons. None of that had mattered in the end. The champion stood in the center of the combat arena, his forearms spread wide in a display of readiness, his compound eyes tracked in multiple directions simultaneously, watching for any sign of threat or weakness. His claws gleamed with bioluminescent poison that could kill most known life forms within minutes. When he spoke, his voice carried across the arena like controlled thunder. "Where is this human warrior?" he demanded in the clicking language of his species. "I grow tired of waiting." Danny Wilson's transport ship docked at the human side of the arena. As he stepped out, the alien observers got their first clear look at Earth's chosen champion. What they saw confused them greatly. The human was large by his species standards, but still tiny compared to Zarthik. He carried no visible weapons and wore only a modified environmental suit. In his hands was what appeared to be a maintenance toolkit filled with construction equipment. Most puzzling of all, he seemed completely relaxed, as if he were arriving for a routine repair job rather than a fight to the death. "Commander." Nexra clicked his claws nervously against his ship's control panel. "What is the human doing?" he transmitted to the other Thraxian vessels. "Those appear to be construction tools, not weapons." Cyan Veltar attempted to probe the human's mind and immediately recoiled in shock. "His thoughts are incomprehensible," the Mindari reported with mental overtones of confusion. "He's not thinking about combat at all. He's thinking about building something. His mind is full of engineering calculations and structural equations. In the arena, Danny had reached the center and begun unpacking his toolkit with the methodical efficiency of someone who had done similar work thousands of times before. He laid out components with careful precision, occasionally glancing up at his massive opponent with the expression of someone taking measurements. "Champion." Zarthik studied the strange human behavior with growing confusion. In his long career, he had faced warriors who used elaborate pre-battle rituals, weapons that required complex preparation, and even opponents who attempted psychological warfare. But he had never encountered anyone who simply ignored him while setting up what appeared to be a construction project. "What are you doing?" "Human," Zarthik demanded. Danny looked up from his work and smiled with genuine friendliness. "Just getting ready, big guy," he replied. "Hope you don't mind waiting a minute while I set things up." The starting signal was given. Zarthik roared his challenge and charged forward with the speed of a bullet train, fully expecting to end the fight within the first 5 seconds. This was his standard approach, and it had never failed. Overwhelm the opponent with pure speed and superior weaponry before they could react or adapt. Danny Wilson didn't dodge, and he didn't raise a weapon. Instead, he did something that no warrior in galactic history had ever attempted in single combat. He started building. The device in Danny's hands came to life with a low humming sound that seemed to make the air itself vibrate. What had looked like a simple maintenance tool suddenly revealed itself as something far more complex. Parts that had seemed random and disconnected began working together in ways that defied easy understanding. Spare shield generators connected to mining equipment, welding components linked with navigation sensors. Everything had been modified and repurposed into something entirely new. As Zarthik charged forward with killing speed, the space around Danny began to fill with a complex pattern of energy barriers. They appeared in sections, building outward from his position like a three-dimensional puzzle being assembled at impossible speed. Each barrier was small by itself, but together they formed an intricate defensive grid that grew larger and more complex with every passing second. The Thraxian champion hit the first barrier at full speed and stopped as if he had run into a solid wall. His claws, designed to penetrate any known armor, simply couldn't find purchase on the shifting energy fields. The barriers weren't just blocking his path, they were actively redirecting his movement, channeling him in directions he hadn't chosen. "To go. What sorcery is this?" Admiral Kethver whispered from his command ship. His crystalline form shifted through several different colors in rapid succession, a sign of deep agitation among his species. Across the alien fleet, emergency conferences erupted as commanders tried to understand what they were witnessing. This wasn't combat as any of them understood it. The human wasn't attacking or even defending in any conventional sense. He was building something in real time while his opponent struggled to reach him. "Commander." Dexter's foreclaws scraped against his ship's metal deck plating, leaving deep gouges. "This is not how single combat works," he transmitted to the other Thraxian vessels. "There are rules, there are traditions. You fight with weapons or natural abilities. You do not construct fortifications during the battle itself," but Danny wasn't finished. As Zarthik attempted to circle around the barriers, the human was already implementing the second phase of his plan. The same device that had created the defensive grid suddenly reconfigured itself, and the barriers began to move. They contracted inward like a closing fist, but not in a simple crushing motion. Instead, they formed channels and pathways that guided the alien champion's movements exactly where Danny wanted them to go. Psion. Veltar found himself completely unable to understand the human's thought patterns. The mind probe that had worked on thousands of different species simply couldn't make sense of Danny's mental processes. "He's not thinking like a warrior at all," the Mindari reported to Admiral Kethver. "His thoughts are pure engineering. He sees the combat as a mechanical problem with variables that need to be controlled and managed. In the arena, Zarthik was discovering that his superior speed and strength were becoming liabilities rather than advantages. Every time he tried to use his momentum to break through the energy barriers, they simply redirected his force in directions that took him further from his target. When he attempted to use his claws to cut through the energy fields, they shifted and flowed around his attacks like water. The champion had fought opponents who were faster than him, stronger than him, and better armed than him. He had faced enemies with superior technology and even some with limited psychic abilities. But he had never encountered anyone who treated a life-or-death combat as if it were an engineering project with problems to be solved rather than an enemy to be defeated. Danny continued his construction work with the calm efficiency of someone who had been doing similar jobs for years. His hands moved with practiced precision as he added new components and made adjustments to his growing system. Occasionally he would glance up at Zarthik to check his position, but mostly he focused on his work with the kind of attention that had made him the best maintenance engineer in the Earth Defense Force. The barriers were no longer just defensive structures. They had evolved into something that resembled a massive three-dimensional maze, with moving walls that changed position based on where the alien champion tried to go. But calling it a maze wasn't quite accurate either, because mazes were designed to confuse and delay. What Danny was building was more like a giant mechanical system with Zarthik as one of the moving parts. The Vexani representative watched the battle from her command ship with growing fascination. She had copied the forms of thousands of different warriors and had thought she understood every possible approach to combat. But this human wasn't fighting at all in any sense she could recognize. He was manipulating the battlefield itself, turning the entire arena into a single, enormous machine. Admiral Kethver found himself leaning forward in his command chair as he watched the impossible scene unfold. In 500 years of conquest, he had seen every conceivable type of warrior. Berserkers who knew no fear and felt no pain. Tactical geniuses who could predict their opponent's moves hours in advance. Psychic warriors who could bend reality itself to their will. But never had he encountered a species that approached warfare as if it were simply another type of problem to be solved with the right tools and enough engineering knowledge. CFX was beginning to understand that something had gone very wrong with this combat. He had been led through a series of increasingly narrow passages until he found himself in a section of the arena where his movement was severely restricted. Every direction he tried to go led him deeper into the mechanical maze that the human had constructed around him. Worse, the harder he struggled against the barriers, the more tightly they seemed to constrain his options. The champion attempted to use his full strength to break free, putting all four arms against the energy barriers and pushing with enough force to bend steel. But the barriers didn't break or even crack. Instead, they absorbed his energy and used it to power additional components of the system. His own strength was being turned against him in ways he couldn't understand or counter for the first time. In his long career, Champion Zarthik began to feel something he had never experienced before in single combat. Not fear exactly, because he still didn't believe the human could actually harm him, but confusion and frustration that was rapidly growing into something close to panic. He was the greatest warrior in the Zephyrian Empire, and he was being defeated by someone who had never thrown a punch or drawn a weapon. Danny made a final adjustment to his control device and stepped back to admire his work. What he had built was essentially a massive mechanical vice, powered by the champion's own kinetic energy and guided by sensors that tracked the alien's every movement. The harder Zarthik struggled, the tighter the mechanism held him. The faster he moved, the more efficiently the system redirected his momentum. Every action the champion took made his situation worse rather than better. The construction had taken exactly 17 minutes from start to finish. Danny had used nothing but standard maintenance equipment, spare parts from mining operations and salvaged components from damaged shield generators. Everything had been repurposed and modified using techniques he had learned during years of keeping spacecraft operational under impossible conditions. Yield. Danny called out, his voice echoing through the arena's speaker system. I've got you locked down tighter than a stripped bolt, and the more you fight it, the worse it's gonna get. This system is designed to contain objects much larger and stronger than you are. You can struggle all day if you want, but you're not going anywhere until I let you out. Champion Zarthik found himself completely immobilized for the first time in his career. He could barely move his claws, let alone use them as weapons. His speed meant nothing when every surface around him channeled his movement back toward the center of the containment system. His strength was being used against him by a mechanical system that grew stronger the harder he fought. Against it, the silence that followed stretched across both fleets like a physical thing. Thousands of alien warriors who had never known defeat watched their greatest champion held helpless by an opponent who had built a trap rather than fought a battle. Finally, with great effort, Zarthik managed to activate his translator device. The words came out slowly and with obvious difficulty, as if each one caused him physical pain. I yield, he said. Admiral Kethver stared at the scene before him with the kind of shock that comes from watching the impossible become reality. His greatest champion, the warrior who had never known defeat in over 300 battles, was trapped like an insect in amber by an opponent who had never even tried to hurt him. The human had won not through superior fighting ability or better weapons, but by refusing to fight at all. The implications of what he was seeing struck the admiral like a physical blow. For 5 centuries, the Zephyrian Empire had conquered worlds by bringing superior force to bear against every enemy they encountered. They had faced every conceivable type of warrior and defeated them all through better technology, superior numbers, or more advanced fighting techniques. But they had never encountered a species that simply ignored the rules of warfare entirely. Commander. Vectra's claws had torn deep gouges in his ship's control panel as he watched his species' greatest warrior defeated by what appeared to be an engineering project. This is impossible, he transmitted to the fleet. Combat has rules. There are ways that battles are supposed to be fought. You cannot simply build your way to victory during single combat, but Danny Wilson had done exactly that. And worse, from the alien's perspective, he had made it look easy. The human had approached the fight with the same calm efficiency he might use to repair a broken life support system. He had identified the problem, gathered the necessary tools, and implemented a solution. The fact that the problem happened to be a 12-foot-tall alien killing machine hadn't seemed to bother him at all. Scion Veltar floated near his ship's observation deck, his mental projections chaotic with confusion and something very close to fear. I cannot understand their thought patterns, he reported to Admiral Kethver. This human's mind works in ways that are completely alien to everything we know about warfare. He sees conflict not as battle but as engineering. He solves opponents rather than fighting them. The Vexani representative had shifted through 17 different forms during the combat, trying to find one that could help her understand what she was witnessing. Finally, she had settled on copying Danny Wilson's own appearance. But even wearing his exact shape didn't help her comprehend his mental processes. When she spoke, her voice carried undertones of genuine bewilderment. I have copied the forms of thousands of warriors across dozens of worlds, she reported. I understand every known approach to single combat, but this human has created something entirely new. He has turned the battlefield itself into a weapon. I do not know how to counter such a strategy because I do not understand the thinking behind it. In the arena, Danny was carefully shutting down his containment system and releasing Champion Zarthik from his mechanical prison. The alien warrior stumbled as the energy barriers dissipated, his forelegs unsteady after 17 minutes of complete immobilization. For the first time in his career, he had been utterly helpless in combat, and the experience had shaken him more than any physical injury could have. You fought well, Danny told him with genuine respect as he packed his tools away. That's a really impressive suit of natural armor you've got there. Must take a lot of energy to maintain something like that. Ziafek stared at the human in complete confusion. The creature was complimenting his biological features as if they had just finished a friendly competition rather than a fight to determine the fate of an entire world. More disturbing still, the human seemed genuinely interested in the engineering aspects of Thoraxian physiology. How did you defeat me? Zarthik asked through his translator. You used no weapons, you made no attacks. You simply built something. How is such a thing possible in single combat? Danny shrugged his massive shoulders as he sealed his toolkit. Same way I fix anything else that's broken, he replied. I looked at the problem, figured out what needed to be controlled, and built a system to control it. You're really fast and really strong, but speed and strength are just engineering variables like anything else. You redirect them properly and they stop being advantages. Admiral Kethver listened to this exchange through his ship's communication system and felt something he had never experienced before in 5 centuries of conquest. Uncertainty. The human had just explained exactly how he had achieved victory. But the explanation made no sense to any military doctrine the Admiral knew. Engineering variables, redirected advantages, systems to control problems. These were not the words of a warrior, but of a technician. Signal the fleet. Admiral Kethver commanded, his voice heavy with an understanding that was both new and deeply troubling. We withdraw immediately. Honor the terms of the combat. But Admiral, Commander Thexfer protested. We have thousands of ships and millions of warriors. Surely we cannot retreat because of one unusual defeat. The Admiral's crystalline form darkened as he considered the true implications of what they had witnessed. You still do not understand what happened here, Commander. We did not lose because their champion was stronger or faster or better armed than ours. We lost because they think about conflict in ways that we have never encountered before. And if one human maintenance worker can defeat our greatest champion using nothing but spare parts and engineering knowledge, what could their entire species accomplish if they decided we were a problem that needed to be solved? The Zephyrian fleet began its withdrawal procedures as Admiral Kethver opened a final communication channel to the human command ship. Captain Morrison, he transmitted, his voice carrying centuries of weariness and newfound respect. "Your champion has fulfilled the terms of our agreement. The Zephyrian Empire withdraws from this system and will not return." Jake Morrison's voice came back clear and confident. "Appreciated, Admiral. And just so you know, Danny's not even our best engineer. He's just the one who was available on short notice. The transmission cut off, leaving the aliens to contemplate a truth that was more terrifying than any weapon they had ever faced. They had brought their strongest warriors to fight a species that didn't even think of conflict as war. The humans thought of it as engineering. And they were very good at building solutions to problems. As the massive alien fleet disappeared into the darkness between stars, word began to spread throughout the galaxy. The Zephyrian Empire, conquerors of 17 star systems and defeaters of countless warrior species, had been turned back by a single human armed with nothing but maintenance tools and an engineering mindset. Other alien civilizations began to take notice of the small blue planet whose inhabitants had won a battle not by being stronger or faster or more advanced, but by simply refusing to fight the way everyone else expected them to. The humans, it seemed, had their own rules, and they were very good at building solutions that made other people's rules irrelevant. Danny Wilson returned to his maintenance duties aboard Station 7 the next day, as if nothing unusual had happened. When asked about his experience by other crew members, he simply shrugged and said it had been an interesting puzzle. Someone had needed something fixed, and he had fixed it. The fact that the something in question had been an interstellar diplomatic crisis involving the fate of humanity didn't seem to make much difference to him. Captain Jake Morrison kept the full details of the encounter classified, but he made sure that Earth's defense planners understood the lesson. Humans had an advantage that no other species in the galaxy possessed. They could look at any problem, no matter how impossible it seemed, and find a way to build a solution. They didn't have to be the strongest or the fastest or the most advanced. They just had to be more creative than their opponents expected. And in a galaxy full of warrior species who all fought the same way, creativity was the most powerful weapon of all.